A chilling threat to the West. The Islamic State group releases a video said to show an American journalist being beheaded. A warning to the United States to halt airstrikes in Iraq. But is the message as much about propaganda as it is a challenge? This is Inside Story. Hello there and welcome to the programme. I'm Laura Kyle. It's been condemned as shocking, brutal and barbaric. A graphic video released by the group known as Islamic State said to show the beheading of an American journalist. Now, speaking with a British accent, his executioner says the death was in retaliation for US airstrikes in Iraq.
Today I authorized 2 operations in Iraq.
The video begins with a statement from US President Barack Obama authorizing military operations in Iraq. It goes on to show what is said to be a US airstrike and then introduces a message to America. Al Jazeera has chosen not to show the rest of the video nor any images from it. It's by no means the first time we've seen a video said to show civilians being beheaded or shot dead by Islamic State fighters, but it is the first where a US journalist is specifically identified and killed. A strong message as the Islamic State group ramps up its propaganda machine. And that is the starting point for our discussion this show. So let's bring in our guests. In our London studios, we have Shiraz Maher, Senior Research Fellow at the International Centre for the Study of Radicalisation at King's College London. Joining us from Cork in the Republic of Ireland is Patrick Coburn, Middle East correspondent for the Independent newspaper, as well as author of the book The Jihadis Return, ISIS and the New Sunni Uprising. And also in London, we have Abu Rumaysah, an Islamic activist who recognises the Islamic State's Caliphate in Syria and Iraq. Great to have you all with us here on Inside Story. Thanks very much for joining us. So, Shiraz Maher, if I could start with you, what do you make of this video that we've seen coming out today?
It's clearly a very brutal and disturbing video. I think what's so interesting about it is the framing of the video. It's being presented as a direct challenge to the United States and to President Obama individually. And the real significance of it is what comes after the execution of James Foley, with the parading of the other American journalist who's being held by the Islamic State, and that really bold, almost bravado, daring of Obama to say, if you continue with your foreign policy in Iraq, we will execute this prisoner next. So it's that sense of belligerence and utter brazen defiance, I think, that is shocking a lot of people right now.
And a very clear message to the West, isn't it? Because we don't actually see any demands made in terms of being able to perhaps release the prisoner. It's just a message.
It is just a message. I mean, the overarching demand, of course, of the video is for Obama to withdraw, to disengage from any form of military or humanitarian activity in Iraq. And, of course, it's that lack of any external presence that has allowed the Islamic State to achieve their goals by creating this caliphate that straddles both the Syrian and Iraqi border. And so in that sense, I think they feel a little pressured right now, because until now they've had a free run of it. They've had very little resistance in both Iraq or Syria, and so they want to drive out the United States before it really gets started, and they're doing that in a very dramatic fashion.
Yeah, Patrick Coburn, I mean, it is a very clear message, as we've been saying. Do you see this as being also a change of tactics by the Islamic State group?
On the contrary, I think chopping off people's heads and giving maximum publicity to their atrocities has been the signature of the Islamic State, of ISIS, from the beginning. They've used this to spread terror. It was used to spread terror to everybody from Shia truck drivers in Syria who were killed just because of their religion, to Iraqi army soldiers on leave. You name it. Now they've just extended this to Americans and the American government. So it's absolutely in keeping with their normal method of operation.
Abu Rumaysah, but just before we look more at the propaganda videos that we've been seeing, all these videos that Patrick mentions of very many executions, chopping off of heads, this particular executioner, we know, has a British accent. You're a British Muslim. What do you make of that?
Yes, well, I can see from the events that have been taking place in Iraq and Syria that it's a global conflict. I think Muslims across the world, there are many who recognize this caliphate and recognize Khalifa Ibrahim, Hafidhahullah. So I think the West need to tread their steps very carefully. They're not facing an organization like Al-Qaeda. They are facing a government which, for all intents and purposes, is bigger than France, bigger than the United Kingdom. And I think if they continue to bury their heads in the sand and be naive and think that this won't escalate, I think it's going to bring a lot of problems to the West. So my message would be to stop the aggression against Muslims in the caliphate. And I believe that if they don't do that, that Barack Obama will have much more blood on his hands.
Oh, yeah, there's plenty of points that you bring up there that I know that we'll want to touch on and discuss in more detail, namely that you call the Islamic State a government and you relate it to France, for example. I'm sure our guests will want to pick up on that group. I just want to illustrate, first of all, though, the nature of the propaganda that we've been seeing coming out of the Islamic State. They've appeared to embrace the need for a very slick media operation. We've seen videos and posts on different social media sites that have provided very effective propaganda in spreading the message and also recruiting new members. Now, in the past, many of the videos have focused on fighting. But as the group has grown in strength and taken more territory, the message has become somewhat more sophisticated. More recent videos, often only a minute long, portray, according to the group, what life is like under the rule of the Islamic State. Here, for example, is the perspective of a kebab shop worker.
الحمد لله رب العالمين الأوضاع تمام والأحوال جيدة والأخوة موجودين والحمد لله رب العالمين والشعب مرتاح ومبسوط الحمد لله بوضع الأخوة الأوضاع مستدبة الحمد لله والشعب مرتاح الحمد لله بوجود الدولة الإسلامية الحمد لله في رقابة وفي تفتيش من الناحية هاي في رقابة وفي تفتيش عندك من ناحية النظافة ومن ناحية الأكل من ناحية الطعام والحمد لله الأكل جيد جدا.
Well, other videos show a seemingly softer side of the Islamic State. Take a look at this. Fighter going to check up on injured fighters in hospital.
إن شاء الله ein paar Brüder besuchen von der Islamiyah für Iraq und Scham und ihr könnt uns inshallah dabei begleiten. السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. كيف الحال؟ الله فيك. كيف المصاب عليك؟
الحمد لله شيخ أحمد الله إن شاء الله. الله في سبيل الله إن شاء الله.
إن شاء الله. Man geht mit den Geschwistern zusammen, kommt inshallah zum Boden der Erde und sucht die Shahada.
Abu Rumaysah, just explain to us what it is about these videos that we're seeing that appeals to you.
I think it's not something that is necessarily very appealing. I mean, I do echo some of the comments that have been made by your guests. It is something very horrific and brutal. But as a Muslim living in the United Kingdom, I want to see an end to the escalation in violence on both sides. And I think that the policies that Barack Obama is causing, as well as his allies in Britain, is not bringing about peace in the Middle East. So I think if we want to have a mature discussion, let's talk about the aggression of the Americans in the caliphate. Let's put a stop to it. And I think we won't see many of these videos come out. And I do hope that the community around the world listen to this message, and perhaps we can save Stephen Sotloff's life by calling for Obama to stop his aggression against Islam and Muslims.
You do see, though, that the US's aggression, as you call it, the airstrikes, is in direct retaliation and comes after extraordinary barbarity at the hands of IS on people in Iraq and in Syria.
Not necessarily. I think we're in the midst of a war, and in war there are many lies and propaganda that are pushed out. I don't believe for 1 minute any of the information that is coming out from the BBC or Al Jazeera that are slandering the Islamic State. I believe it's the policy of the Islamic State to look after its citizens, whether they're Muslim or non-Muslim. But what we are seeing from America is that they can see their interests in the region are rapidly being lost, and they're not going to have that, and they're willing to spill a lot of Muslim blood to preserve that. But I think they need to be very careful, because they're not dealing with an organization anymore. They are dealing with an Islamic State which has borders which are expanding, and I think they should take heed of that.
Okay, Shiraz Maher, I mean, as you can see, as we can hear from what Abu Rumaysah is saying, these videos, the message of the Islamic State is having quite a strong impact on a number of people around the world. It's a pretty sophisticated propaganda machine that's working.
It is a pretty sophisticated propaganda machine, but people like Abu Rumaysah are invested partisans. He claims to be objective, but of course he's not. He says he wants to see an end to the bloodshed and the fighting on all sides, but then he goes on to say the Islamic State is expanding. Well, how is it expanding? It's expanding through military force. If you go and oppress people, they tend to fight back. So when they do that, he objects to that. He basically wants everyone to capitulate to the demands of the Islamic State. We heard nothing about the persecution of the Yazidis from him, about the persecution of Christians who have had to flee, about the persecution of the Kurds who have had to give up large chunks of territory and fight against the Islamic State. So in this context, these people who are attracted to the message of the Islamic State, to its videos, to its propaganda, are people who were already invested. Abu Rumaysah has a long history of supporting extremist causes way before the Islamic State emerged or ISIS emerged on the scene. So he's just investing his energies into the latest fad that has come along, unfortunately, in the jihadist world.
Abu Rumaysah, your response? I mean, what do you say about the persecution of the Yazidis and of the Christians, of which there is no doubt?
No, I mean, I totally disagree with that. I think, I mean, if we look at the conflicting reports that are coming out, a couple of months ago we had the case of Indian nurses being allowed safe passage by the Islamic State to India. So I think we need to take a reality check. There is a war going on and there is a lot of propaganda being pushed out. It's not the policy of the Islamic State to kill and massacre non-Muslims for no reason.
Yazidis fleeing into the mountains is not propaganda. That's objective. You can see it with your own eyes.
I think you'll find, Shiraz, that the reports are coming out that these numbers are very exaggerated. And like I said, it's not the policy of the Islamic State to persecute non-Muslims. It's the policy of the Islamic State to liberate them. Now, I believe that we should look to that and not spread lies from the BBC or Al Jazeera or any other kind of media.
Okay, Patrick Kebab, I can hear you wanting to come in. Please
I'd just like to ask Abu Rumaysah, I mean, how does he view the pictures put out by the Islamic State on their videos of Shia truck drivers being executed beside the road? This is the shedding of Muslim blood, or maybe he should tell us directly, does he think the Shia are Muslims or not? How does he justify this?
Patrick,
Islamic
what do you think about the airstrikes on the Caliphate?
Tell us directly.
What do you think about the airstrikes on the Caliphate? What do you think about the gallons and gallons of Muslim blood that is being spilt in the Islamic State? I think let's not be hypocrites.
Yeah, well, these are Muslims who are being killed
are at war with
by
Muslims.
Members of the Islamic State. They're reported to have killed 700 members of a tribe in Deir ez-Zor province recently. But could you answer the question? Do you think Shia are Muslims or not?
Well, whether I believe they're Muslim or not, I think is irrelevant.
It is very relevant, I think.
It is absolutely relevant because they're being murdered.
I mean, if you let me answer the question,
you seem to be justifying murder. Are you or are you not justifying?
If you let me answer the question. Okay, if you let me answer the question.
Answer the question, but don't avoid it.
Yeah, I believe that at the moment there is a lot of conflict taking place in the Middle East, and the Shia Rafid are playing a big part in that. And so we're seeing many who are joining the army, and they are attacking the caliphate, killing innocent men, women and children. And of course the Islamic State are going to defend themselves against these people. Now, if we want to have peace and security, I think we should tell those Shia people who are joining the army, as well as those people who are joining the Peshmerga and the Kurds, they should stop this aggression. I think it's ridiculous to say that the Islamic State should sit there and accept the violence that's being inflicted on them. We're talking about
truck drivers, we're talking about innocent villagers who are being shot in the head.
They're not just truck drivers.
And these are on your own
They're not just truck drivers.
Videos. I mean, you seem to be justifying that,
aren't you? The massacre of Muslims in the Caliphate. I don't buy that for 1 second. They're not truck drivers, Patrick. They are people who are assisting the war led by America, and they are killing many people in that caliphate. Now, I and you want to see an end to that. So let's ask those people
who are escalating this conflict stop killing innocent people.
By not performing acts of aggression in the Middle East.
Shiraz Maher, let's just bring you. Go on, okay.
Yeah. I was going to say, how can you say, on the one hand, the Islamic State has the right to defend itself against Shia forces that may be from the Iraqi army or against the Peshmerga or that kind of thing, and then at the same time say the Islamic State is expanding? How is it expanding? It's expanding through military force. So then don't those people have the right to defend themselves against what is a belligerent, malignant force coming at them? You can't have it both ways, and this is the rank hypocrisy, I'm afraid, of Abu Rumaysah's position here.
Shiraz, Allah, He says in the Quran, وَقَاتِلُوهُمْ حَتَّى لَا تَكُونَ فِتْنَةً, that the Muslims were sent on this earth to eradicate the oppression and the polytheism of democracy. So of course, when the Islamic State expands, it's not going to persecute and oppress, it's going to liberate the non-Muslims.
Abu Rumaysah, I'm just interested at this point.
Even more.
I'm interested to get from you why you are so keen to go and live in the Caliphate.
Well, unfortunately, if it was that easy, I think I would probably be on the next plane. But
well, it is that easy because we've seen
laws.
some people say some 500 fighters from Britain or Muslims from Britain become fighters in Syria and Iraq, fighting directly for IS. It is that easy. Why are you so keen to go?
Well, let's not make this news story about myself. I think, look, the reality is the Caliphate exists. And many Muslims, not just myself, want to migrate there and live there peacefully.
But why? This is what I'm trying to understand. What is so attractive about it?
Well, it's a caliphate. I mean, they say that in Islam, 80% of the rules in the Quran can't be implemented without the caliphate. And now that we have it, much of the Islamic rules can be implemented. So it's not just something that is a fantasy. This reality is something which affects Muslims worldwide. That is why we are seeing so many Muslims pledge allegiance to this caliphate. That is why we are seeing many Muslims showing the desire to emigrate there and live there peacefully under the Sharia.
Patrick Coburn, do you think there are that many Muslims who would happily move to Iraq at the moment, to these parts of Syria where the IS has set up this caliphate, where it's, you know, in control, even after it sees all these barbaric videos and these executions and these complete non-tolerance for anyone who leads their lives in a different way?
Well, of course, the movement is all the other way, isn't it? It's refugees fleeing the caliphate. It's hundreds of thousands of people moving into Kurdish-controlled territory. It's people trying to move across the Turkish border. So it's people moving out of the caliphate, not into it. There'll be a small minority of people who want to go there. Lots of fantasies, just like those we've been listening to. But what the aim of these videos, of course, is to spread terror, and it succeeds in doing so. At the end of the day, I think it'll be disastrous for much of the population of Iraq and Syria, particularly the Sunni population. But this is atrocities, whatever is denied. And the number of people who want to get involved in this, sure, there'll be a small minority, but fortunately not very numerous.
Shiraz Maher, you're an expert in radicalisation of Muslims. I mean, what sort of person is attracted to uproot their life and move over to Iraq, to pick up arms? I'm not necessarily talking about Abu Rumaysah, I'm talking about somebody who wants to go and actually fight on the front line. Why do they want to do that?
Yeah, I think Patrick actually nailed the issue when he says it's a very small minority of people. Interestingly, from our centre, we've been speaking to foreign fighters who've gone out to Syria for the last 18 months. Originally, when we first started doing this, a lot of the people who were out there were saying to us, look, we are here because we wanted to help the civilian population. We saw the oppression of the Assad regime, and there was more of a humanitarian narrative. Over time, that's been replaced almost entirely by people who are saying to us, when we say to them, you know, the Syrian people don't want the agenda of the Islamic State, for example. How do you feel about that? They say quite boldly, you know, we're not here for the Syrian people. We're not here to please them. We're here to create an Islamic State, and the land doesn't belong to them. It belongs to Allah, so we will basically do what we please because we have the guns. So these are individuals who are highly radicalized. They've bought into this idea that there is one prescribed model of Islamic governance, that it is the caliphate, and they are divorced from democracy. They tend to have a very rudimentary and simplistic understanding, not just of Islam, but of life in general, and they view the world in these highly binary terms, often through emotive paradigms as well that leads them out there. And so now, of course, with the establishment or the declaration, at least from Baghdadi, of the caliphate, there's been a sort of resurgence. It's kind of been galvanized a little bit because for a lot of people, and Abu Rumaysah included, they believe the caliphate really does exist. And so in many cases, you have seen people get up, pack their bags and go. We've seen schoolgirls from the north of England, teenagers who have packed their bags and gone out there. It's remarkable that a man like Abu Rumaysah is happy to sit in Knightsbridge in London, that he's not out there.
Would you go, Abu Rumaysah? I know we've touched on this before, but would you go if there was no hope of you ever returning to Britain? Would you renounce your British citizenship for you? I know you've got young kids, your wife, your whole family. Would you go?
Well, I think me and many Muslims will be willing to renounce our British citizenship if we can have safe passage to the Caliphate. And I think that will work for both sides. I think if Muslims have safe passage to the Caliphate from Britain, you will see scores and scores of Muslims wanting to go. So hopefully one day the British government will change their oppressive policy on Muslims, and one day you'll see many Muslims migrate to this Caliphate.
Patrick Coburn, is there then a future for the Caliphate? Is there room for these people to go and indeed to see the Caliphate growing?
Well, it's pretty cheeky to demand safe passage to the Caliphate in order then to fight and kill people. The Caliphate exists. The its population, there are probably about 5 or 6 million people who may not want to be there, but they are there. And it's expanding from right north of Baghdad and above all north of Damascus. Its constituency will be bigger in Syria, I think, than Iraq. Simply because the Sunni are only about 20% of the Iraqi population and over 60, Sunni Arabs about 60% in Syria. So it is expanding. Now, in Iraq, its fear of the Caliphate has united previously very hostile elements, like the Iranians and the Americans, like the different parties of the Kurds, the politicians in Baghdad. But one of the things that opens the door to them, I think, is that in Syria, the policy of America, Britain, of France, and their Arab allies is to say they oppose the Caliphate, but they also are trying to weaken President Assad, although those are the two main powers in Syria at the moment. So I think that Western policy in Syria is very bankrupt at the moment. There's a pretense that America and Saudi Arabia and the others are supporting moderate Syrian armed opposition, but this barely exists on the ground and is getting weaker by the day. So I think if they really want to do something serious, other than all the rhetoric we've heard over the last few days, it is they have to think seriously about changing their policy towards Assad. They don't have to like him, but he's the only alternative to ISIS, which controls about 40% of the country.
The situation in Syria deserves a whole another half-hour discussion. I mean, we do have to stick to what's happening in Iraq.
That is an appalling thing for Patrick to say. It is basically licensing Assad's murder and tyranny, not just since 2011.
Absolutely, and we are running out of time, so I don't want to get onto Syria in this particular discussion, because, of course, that is a whole new area that deserves a lot of time devoted to it. I'm interested in just focusing lastly on what the international community is going to do, looking at the strength of IS as it is today. We've got this message to America, a second hostage being held. Shiraz Maher, sorry, is the US going to stop its airstrikes? Is it going to take on board this message?
Well, this is the genius, really, of the propaganda move that ISIS, or the Islamic State, has delivered by producing this video. It has really painted the American administration into a corner now, because if the United States continues with its course of action, which I suspect it will, then the subsequent hostages are most likely to be executed. If it changes, then that hands a massive, not just propaganda, but military coup as well to the Islamic State. So right now, what the Islamic State has on its side is the ability to produce blackmail and dramatic propaganda in this fashion, which can be seen to be holding Western governments to ransom. I suspect they won't react in quite that way, but it is highly tragic that innocent people, such as these journalists who are being held, are going to be used as pawns in this dramatic power play between these two forces.
Absolutely. OK, and there, I'm afraid, gentlemen, we do have to leave today's discussion. There's never enough time, as ever. It's very interesting to have this debate, and we really appreciate you all coming on today. Patrick Coburn in Ireland, and Shiraz Maher and Abu Rumaysah in London. And do add your voice to this discussion. You can leave your comments on facebook.com/AJ Inside Story, or go to @AJ Inside Story on Twitter. I'm Laura Kyle. Many thanks for watching. Bye for now.